A wide variety to give a taster of the potential we have here in Moray. I'm sure there will be some questions coming out of all this. Before I let anybody else have a question, though, I shall take chair's privilege. And I was curious, actually, just supposed to hear from both Mel and Martin, as two folk who work in commercial archaeology across the country. What are your perceptions of how the archaeology of Moray is comparing to what you're seeing in other areas within the commercial sector?
That's quite a hard question. The area around Inverness is, it's particularly with Culduffel, that's been a bit of a game changer, to be honest, in many ways. And Birnie. Yeah, I don't know. How does it compare with?
Sorry, yeah. It does feel that there has been this real critical mass of material emerging here in the last few years, perhaps more so than we've seen in other areas. But I'm biased by what I know. I was wondering, when you're working more widely across Scotland, how you feel about that. Could you pass on to Mark?
Certainly in the Iron Age period, I think the evidence we've got in Morayshire is probably better than a lot of places in Scotland, to be honest with you. We haven't really had the same. They've had huge development in East Lothian, the Central Belt. I don't think it's had the same impact as in Aberdeenshire and Morayshire. So, from the point of view of commercial archaeology and the Iron Age, I think it's been hugely important. And when a lot of that is published, there's things coming out in the next couple of months. I think Dawn, McLaren and Rob are publishing Beachfield, and a few other things will be published. Duffel's coming along as well. So I think once that's out, we'll see that it's had a huge impact on the area. I think the large-scale development that just didn't take place in this area has meant that we've just got far more information, and we probably had a lot of that information in other areas already. But we aren't getting. Some archaeology is still missing. Some of the huge Roman archaeology probably doesn't exist up here. A lot of the Neolithic and Bronze Age stuff, although Mel touched on Bronze Age, probably get more of that in Perthshire and further south, I think. But it has been huge, yeah.
So beginning to get the sense almost of hotspots of particular periods. I've nobbled the first question. Any more questions? Any big topics you'd like to ask, or small topics you'd like to ask? Jonathan, can we get a microphone first?
Ian made the point with one of his slides about Spiny, and as a sort of throwaway mark, he mentioned that Clarkly Hill, Cowsey and Kinfeather were all on this headland, and you also mentioned Colwyn as a centre, which I think someone has done research on this sort of little islet of focus of Iron Age activity. I wonder if you or Ian or somebody could develop on that theme. Are these particular, is it something to do with this liminal places that's leading to this?
Thanks, Professor Armit. The work Jonathan mentioned is stuff that Richard Bradley and colleagues have been doing field walking round about Coleman Sands, and one of the things they've been able to show for early prehistory is that Coleman really is acting very much as an island, that the area to the south of, I suppose, the modern dune system was effectively water or bog and cutting off the area from the south. So what is now the Coleman Sands was effectively an island. And they've commented for the earlier prehistoric period, looking especially at the Neolithic and early Bronze Age, the high amount of imported material, the large amount of unfinished materials. There's a lot of unfinished arrowheads from the Coleman Sands, suggesting there's a lot of production activity going on there. You've also got production, it's argued you get production of things like phalanx beads in the early Bronze Age. They're an early form of glass bead. So certainly in the early Bronze Age, the argument is that Coleman area is acting as something special. For the early medieval period, people have argued it's almost a beach market. I've always been a little sceptical about that argument. I might pass this on to Gordon in a minute to pass the blame. Because these sand dunes are slightly odd sites in terms of their archaeological recovery process. They see a lot of antiquarian interest, a lot of field walking interest, and it's relatively easy to find stuff because you've essentially a clean, sandy environment to pick things up in. So you have to be a little cautious in thinking that what you're getting is representative of what's happening more widely. Now in the Neolithic, Richard has made a very convincing argument that Coleman is something special. The early medieval I'm less convinced by because there's not much material coming out of the sands. For the Iron Age, specifically for Coleman, I think it looks like another of these rich sites. It doesn't look disproportionately different from a Culduffel or a Clarkley or a Birnie kind of site. The question of the new island that is forming from Birkhead to Curator, I think is one that's never really been fully examined, but you do wonder with the stuff that Dean and Lindsay have been getting of these strange ways of treating the dead along that coastline, that it's not just the fact that you have all these interesting caves, it is also the fact that it is an island. The implications for Clarkley, I must say, I haven't really considered, but I can easily pass the microphone back along to Ian at this point. Or to Lindsay, actually, do you have anything to say? Excellent.
Yeah, it is interesting that Clarkley is on that side of that loch and that boggy area. If we are thinking about this peninsula, I suppose, as being this slightly liminal place, I'd always thought of it as being this sort of liminal place where the journey across the lochs and across that boggy area to the cave was important in that kind of transition from maybe the land of the living, where the farming and the settlement happens, to that sort of land of the dead, where you've suddenly got this interface landscape between land and sea. So it is really interesting to think of Clarkley positioned where it is, and I'm going to have to think about that a bit more. So, yeah.
So I'll hog the mic again. The other interesting thing that's come up in a number of talks, I think, is this idea of the longevity of the landscape and how the ancient history of these landscapes is shaping what happens in later periods. And you can see that, I think, in the dates that Ian and Lindsay were showing from the long-term use of some of these sites. People, I guess, would have been aware that they've been used repeatedly, in the same way as we see at Clarkley or at Birnie, that they're coming back to older sites. The point that Tanya was making with the evolution of the use of these sites, how the use is changing over time. I wouldn't quite call these people early archaeologists, but they're very aware of the landscape and on the ancient history of the landscape, and they see it in that sense as something important and something powerful in and of itself, something they can then use themselves. More questions?
Apparently there's a current trend in farming to go back to light cultivation. Will this make a big difference, or has too much damage been done in the past?
First clear looking.
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. I mean, it would stop any further damage from happening, or it would reduce the amount of damage that is happening. A lot of damage has already been done. It tends to be with the change of sort of into potato farming that's a lot deeper, but at some sites it hasn't had an impact. So likes of just outside Craigellachie, where Dave has worked, the archaeology there was not impacted by the plough because it was probably about a metre down. Yeah. So it is variable, but there is a lot of crop marks that have been ploughed out and a lot of sites that have been ploughed out already. If there is a change and there is going to a reduction in the depth of ploughing, I would say it's a positive step in terms of protection and management of archaeology.
Although we should also be perhaps using some of this, the fact this is a rich arable area, to be doing more field walking, a point that Gemma raised, because this really is a resource that's been used, or a technique that's been used very widely elsewhere, really hasn't been used much in Moray, and it could revolutionise our understanding, especially of early prehistory, as well as of slag hills.
And maybe a question back at the farmers. As I understand it, modern farming technology allows the combine harvesters to record yields over certain areas because everything is now GIS controlled. or GPS controlled, and then adjust the fertilizing as well, so that, for example, with crop marks where we have this differential growth, which we rely on in order to pick them up, because some corn is ripening slower than others and maybe yielding less over the archaeological features or vice versa, that now these sophisticated techniques of fertilizing certain areas will blank out crop marks. And I wonder, is this true? I've only heard that. I haven't got much experience with this. And is this, in that sense, a danger not in destroying the archaeology, but us not being able to see it anymore?
He will see it in the farmer's records, because he will know where he's applying the extra fertiliser or the less fertiliser.
The point was that perhaps the farming records themselves will show the quantities of fertiliser going into different areas.
Do you think the stone that was found in the River Spey at Craigellachie, which is now in the museum, do you think that was connected to the Macallan Elchies items that you were talking about?
In a word, no. We did excavate around the find spot of the Dandelion stone, and we didn't find where exactly it had come from, so we can't say with any certainty whether it is sitting where it had been all along, or whether it's been moved. So we really can't find any definite link, beyond the fact that we did find a structure with Pictish date beside the find spot of the stone.
Which does reinforce the value of excavating around these find spots, because some may produce nothing, but every so often you will get something interesting. More questions?
What are the panel's views on the random metal detectorist?
Oh, controversial. Views on metal detector. I'm being pointed out. I'm happy to answer from my point of view. I think responsible metal detecting works really effectively. It takes us to sites we wouldn't otherwise know about, but the key word there is responsible. I think Moray, because of the work of Elgin Museum, good relationships have been built with many of the detectorists in Moray, and a lot of stuff gets reported. Metal detecting is a tool in that sense, like field walking. If it's used responsibly, you find interesting things, and you can use that to investigate the past. The problem is when it's being used irresponsibly, and that's something we need to make as unacceptable as collecting birds' eggs now is.
Is there any truth that the Romans had a port at the mouth of the Spey?
Nobody else is looking like they want to answer that question. The question of the direct Roman involvement in Moray, I suppose I was talking about the indirect Roman involvement, the trade contacts, the diplomacy and so on. The question of any direct Roman involvement in Moray has been a point of discussion for over 300 years now. And views on this differ. There's no doubt at all that the Roman army campaigned up through this area in the 1st century. One of the great questions has been the presence of a camp around Belly, around Roman Camp Gate. And it does seem, and certainly Elgin Keeler was convinced, now I would believe him on this, that there was a camp in that area that was lost to the Spey floods. Because the disposition of the camps heading up towards this area would entirely support there having been a camp in that area. The positioning by the river mouth is likely to have involved it being garrisoned or being supplied by sea, I would think. So we have to imagine in the direct Roman military involvement in the area, both by land and by sea, is sensible. You look at the distribution of Roman finds in this area, and they're coming in by sea. A lot of these things are being brought in by boat.
Hi, my name's Nick Brown. I'm an architect and a town planner from Cullen in Banffshire. My question to you is a general one, and it is, as archaeologists, do you feel that your work is properly appreciated and indeed rewarded? And I'm particularly thinking about politicians and developers and even young people when I'm asking that question.
Who's going to be brave enough? Gordon, you were saying. Excellent.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there's the same public interest in many other academic disciplines, and also the professional contract archaeology has been fantastic in recent years in terms of engaging a wider public in archaeology. And the likes of Matt's been doing great work in terms of producing school resource packs, and like to try and get this material more into the schools, which would definitely be a great thing to see. But I think there's a huge appetite out there for archaeology and heritage more generally. And I'm sure Tanya could talk more about the impacts that archaeology, architecture of the past is beginning to have an impact on things like town planning and design of buildings and the like as well. So loads of real world applications for what we do, as well as obviously discovering more about the past.
Yes, it's. I think there's always two sides of the medal to this, and the participation today shows, I would say, how many people in Moray and beyond, I'm sure, are interested in archaeology, want to hear more, learn more, and that this stretches through all periods. And this is a way we can engage with the past, with individual events, with wider topics, and because archaeology is also such a finite resource, it is very precious, and therefore people are more and more realizing this and being more careful. Also, it offers the chance to get involved yourself. It's not just coming here and listening what other people are doing, but there are a lot more community projects springing up, and not just where, like, with Birnie, where Fraser had his project and local volunteers joined in, but projects that are being developed within the community and are community-led and work in partnership with archaeologists. So I think there is a lot that's happening already, and a lot more we can do in making our archaeological findings more relevant. For example, I am working with architects, having an architectural background as well, and builders, to trying to translate more of these prehistoric and sustainable building practices into modern architecture. So not that we need to one by one build roundhouses everywhere, but use of turf, for example, or use of more organic green oak, and demonstrating that this was well done in prehistory, and we can translate it into modern period. So bringing archaeology in more and more. But the other side of the medal is presumably with Mel and Martin, what they are seeing, that at a time of economic pressure, economic downturns and developments are getting more and more difficult to do. There's more and more time pressure and money pressure of getting the archaeological conditions undertaken, and presumably Claire is seeing this as well. And I have worked in commercial archaeology as well. You're essentially trying to get every penny out, and it's not just the work in the field is perhaps easier to understand for a developer, that they need to pay people to excavate this, but once you come off, then having to pay for the post-ex when it's completely removed from everybody's sight. But it's similarly important, as all our work has shown today. This, I think, will become more and more difficult, and there will be more and more pressure on people like Claire and Bruce, who are putting planning conditions on, and we may have to make difficult decisions, as much as in other sectors about hospital and schools, in archaeology as well. And we've seen quite bad trends in the south of England, where conditions are not being put onto development sites as well, and this information is just lost. So yeah, there's always two sides of the coin, and we need to, especially in that commercial context, promote more the value of archaeology and what it can tell us, and help people connect with their past locally and more widely as well. So there's probably still some more work to be done in that commercial context.
So just to add to that, I absolutely agree. I think selling the results of the commercial work in that sense is one of the really important things. That's why a conference like today is really important in showing the value of the new data, the new information coming out. making this available to the wider public is critical in winning the hearts and minds of the wider public. And this should mean that you get more support, you get a popular groundswell that will stop people doing things like selling off the collections of the Faulkner Museum, for example.
I would add to that, I'm afraid that archaeology is quite a fragmented discipline, and that we, as a sector, very rarely talk amongst ourselves or collaborate as much as we should. In terms of archaeology on the National Forest estate, it's about, for every £10 that's spent on the environment, £1 is spent on archaeology in the historic environment. We still run archaeology in this country on an absolute shoestring. And we often end up talking in echo chambers to interested people like yourselves, rather than very much successful outreach. And I think more pressure on politicians and our government agencies to step up the investment in archaeology in the historic environment would be a very good thing.
On that same question, the treasure trove system is brilliant, okay, but you've now got one person essentially running treasure trove for the whole of Scotland, and this is just ridiculous. It can't be sustained. Even if the two people who are normally in post were in post at the moment, or working at the moment, it's still not working, the backlog. You know, we're getting tremendous support from metal detectors coming in with their stuff, and the delays are just making them lose heart, and this is not helping the system to work. Thank you.
Absolutely, my answer would be complain to your MP, complain to your MSP, complain to the Crown Office, because if we don't complain, there's no voice. So if something's wrong, we need to talk about it. Let's keep talking. Claire wants us to stop. Let's keep going. Final word to Edna, and then we'll wrap it up.
It's 2 years since the Archaeology for All project finished, and still every week there are several hits on the website just pointing to the enthusiasm of volunteers and of community archaeology. So I've got this virtual sack of cash here, and I'd just like to ask you, individuals, what would you like to spend it on? You know, because there is money. I mean, let's be positive. There is money out there. It just needs to be applied for. So what do you think the most useful thing to do in our local area would be?
Rapid dating round, 10 seconds answers each. John.
Give some more financial support to your local museum.
As you spoke about earlier, provide money for these great syntheses, especially with the commercial, all the data that's coming out of commercial archaeology, get it into the public.
Yeah, I would agree with that, for sure. Absolutely. Some wide-ranging synthetic work to pull all of the amazing projects that have been happening, pulling that together to provide a bigger story.
And just getting stuff published. Yeah. There's a lot of information out there and not enough of it's published.
I think these two things go together actually. I think getting it published, getting it synthesised, and so that people can see the actual impact it makes on how we understand the past and the value of everything that we're doing. That's where the money should be targeted.
I would say dig more roundhouses. and maybe also apply modern technologies at this macro and micro level and bring in other specialists. And yeah, if we don't add to the data, then we'll be using the same sites again and again.
Yeah, on a different note, I think all commercial units should publish, just get through their backlog and leave the money aside for more community projects and get people involved. There's loads of great projects happening all across Scotland, and every weekend somebody's doing something. So yeah, get involved. I think spend it on some great projects.
And in addition to supporting the museum, the local libraries and archives are as well are just an absolutely incredible resource for understanding the past. So supporting them and making their material more widely available online as well.
reinvigorating the Pictish Trail. I think the Pictish archaeology is really outstanding, and I think it's such an icon for Scotland, and we should really be doing more to promote that and making all this wonderful carved stones and sites accessible to the public, and I think there are moves afoot to do that, so let's make it happen.
I agree with everything everyone said so far, but I would also say start a field walking group, something regular that local people can run for themselves.
I would argue that historic Assynt and Clactaw Broch should be used as a model for the sort of conservation research and excavation that communities can start. And to their credit, it was HLF and Historic Environment Scotland that funded that. It's a tremendous project on a really important site that could be replicated at significant places across Scotland, leading to more research, leading to more community engagement, and leading to better protection of our monuments, which is what we're actually famous for, is outstanding monuments in the landscape.
I would follow on from that. I think actually having a regular big dig is important, because one of these things that acts as a focus for attention, it really builds up people's enthusiasm into an area. That was a great question, Edna. Thank you. Let's look at the gas. We should at this point stop our leathers, and I think it's over to Grenville to offer a vote. Thank you, Jordan. Proceeding to close.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a fascinating, interesting and most informative day, and I think whether you're an expert or, like me, an innocent, then there's been something in it for you, and it's been wonderful to learn more and discover more. We started off with the excavations at Granton Road Forest. It's always amusing to me how every now and then you pass through a road countless times, week after week, and you think, what are they doing over there? And you discover that actually they were excavating and finding interesting things. And the whole question of commercial archaeology I found interesting. They did come to do such a survey out in our area some years ago, and I did wonder about borrowing something from the museum and putting it out in the field to see if they would find it, and that might stop the development, but unfortunately it didn't. But nonetheless, the value of it is interesting. Macallan and David Anderson, I have to admit to you that I'm interested in Macallan, but for different reasons. But it was watching that incredible 100 million development taking place, to realise what happened before it is fascinating. And Dr. Melanie Johnson on Lesmurdy Road, I found that equally interesting, just right on the doorstep of Elgin, if you like, and absolutely fascinating. We then had Leaf on Cluny Hill, and I was particularly impressed by somebody who clearly grabbed the subject because he was fascinated in that particular subject and said, I'm going to learn more. I'm going to Cluny Hill on this coming Wednesday evening for the colours of Cluny, and it's going to take on a new meaning to me, walking up there. I'm really going to be looking forward to it. The Picts and the Picts project, Gordon Noble, was great, and again, there's clearly, possibly, I agree with you, a Pict Trail there waiting to be created. I was particularly amused by the question about chiefs and kings, because as far as I've known, since records began, the chief and king of Burghead was always called Danny Ralph. Anyway, we then had Fraser looking behind the Iron Age and Roman objects, and as always with Fraser, every time he comes up here, he addresses us with a huge passion for the subject and for Moray and all the things he's helped us to find and he's led us in. And Dr. Tanya, thank you very much for your your burnt down roundhouse, the fire brigade taking these pails away. That's what you discover. And Matt from the Forestry Commission, you've brought a new dimension to my dog walking. And I hesitate to say it, but I was born just at the end of the war, and so those particular World War II artefacts have always been a part of my life as I've grown up and played on them over the years. And to discover them now being listed and kept and looked after is rather worrying, but there we are. And Dr. Gemma from the National Museums on Iron and Iron Age, again, I think there's another trail there to be looked at. There's no question. And finally, we got to the Cowsey and the cave and Professor Ian. My goodness me, there's a detective story in there. Ian Rankin should be coming up with Rebus to look into all of that. Really, absolutely fascinating to learn all about the caves and what's been discovered, even after constant research into it. All of this takes a huge amount of hard work and research by our speakers. And first of all, I'd like you to join me in thanking them for really an outstanding day. I'm very proud of the connection that Elgin Museum has with the National Museums of Scotland. It's a two-way effort, and I think it's an example to the rest of Scotland as to how local people and a local museum can learn and can cooperate and achieve a great deal. And I'm very grateful to the National Museum for the support it gives to us. 2017 has been a great year for Elgin Museum. We've celebrated the year of history, heritage and archaeology to the full. And today's conference has been really the highlight, the pinnacle of our efforts this year. And that makes it particularly pleasing to see a packed house. We've filled and sold all the tickets. It's absolutely wonderful. Moray may be a small region, but I think we've seen today that we have a big presence in the archaeological record, and it's great to think that that's the case. I'd like to thank, please, the staff of the Alexander Graham Bell Centre here for helping us to put this on. I'd like to thank our funders, the Heritage Lottery Fund, Event Scotland, Visit Scotland, and for their support throughout the year. And our sponsors today are our Walkers of Aberlour and Glenmurray Distillery. However, about sort of a year and a half ago at the board, someone says we're thinking of having a conference, in 2017, and don't worry, we'll organise it. We'll take it on and it'll happen. And the months go by and you see things, notes come across your emails and so on about it all. And then it comes to the day and you realise what a fantastic success it's been. And what a huge work and effort has gone into organising it. And the two people who have done that, helped by countless volunteers from Elgin Museum and the Moray Society, but the two people who have done it are Janet Trifle and Claire Herbert. And I really want to thank them from the bottom of my heart for what they've done today for the promotion of this event. Thank you very much indeed. For those of you who are out and about tomorrow, whether it's the cathedral or in the town, we look forward to seeing you. But many thanks to you all for coming along and joining us today. And please, we look forward to seeing you all in Elgin Museum in 2018. And have a great evening.